Hello everybody. Depending upon what is available this semester, you should have either read Perry's First Night or have read some secondary texts discussing various theories of personal identity. For the next module, the same thing will be true, except that you will have either read Perry's Second Night or a separate reading depending upon availability. The reason that this might vary is to keep the price of texts down. You should always do the readings before viewing the lectures. Even if you feel you do not understand the readings at first, struggling with the material yourself, whether it is for philosophy or any other course, will help you understand the material more thoroughly than if you jump into somebody else's explanation for you. Whether Perry as a primary source is available this semester or not, we will be discussing his first and second nights because they are individual pieces of work that describe a variety of theories, and the dialogue he presents is quite effective. Thus I will be using Perry as a springboard by which to discuss the multiple theories and concepts for which you are responsible. Remember that in college courses it is often standard to have new material introduced in the lectures and to still be responsible for material covered in the texts. As mentioned, Perry's work is a dialogue. This dialogue takes place between three main characters. First there's Gretchen Weirob, who is something of the Socratic star of the piece. She is a philosopher who was in a terrible accident and is dying. Though her mind is currently sound, her body will only hold out for a couple more days. By star, I simply mean that she is the primary source of arguments and clarification of the piece. This does not mean that you must agree with her position, though certainly her challenges would need to be addressed for thoughtful disagreement. She doesn't spend a great deal of time during the first two nights putting forward her own theory, but she seems to hold something like the body criterion of personal identity. A person is the same person if and only if she has the same body. She is being visited in the hospital by Sam Miller, who is a chaplain and longtime friend. He will be her primary philosophical opponent. In the first night he will be defending the sole criterion of personal identity. A person is the same person under this theory if and only if she has the same soul. There is also David Cohen in the room, who is one of her former students. In the first and second nights he only plays a minor role. Miller, a chaplain remember, comes into her room saying, "Good evening, Gretchen. Hello, Dave. I guess there's not much point in beating around the bush, Gretchen. The medics tell me you're a goner. Is there anything I could do to help?" To which Weirob replies, "Criminy, Sam, you deal with the dying every day. Don't you have anything more comforting to say than, 'Sorry to hear you're a goner'?" To which he says, "Well, to tell you the truth, I'm a little at a loss for what to say to you. Most people I deal with are believers like I am. We talk about the prospects for survival. I give assurance that God, who is just and merciful, would not permit such a travesty as that our short life on this earth should be the end of things. But you and I have talked about religious and philosophical issues for years. I have never been able to find you in the least inclination to believe in God. Indeed, it's a rare day where you are sure that your friends have minds, or that you can see your own hand in front of your face, or that there is any reason to believe that the sun will rise tomorrow. How can I hope to comfort you with the prospect of life after death when I know you will regard it as having no probability whatsoever?" And this is the setup for the discussion over the next several nights. Weirob makes the following deal with Sam Miller. She tells him that she does not require any kind of certainty or even likeliness of life after death to be comforted by the thought. She points out that when she played tennis with him in the past, she would almost always lose, but the very rare occasions where she would win, the mere possibility that she could win, gave her hope and kept her keen to play. Similarly, she says that if Sam Miller can convince her that there is merely the possibility that she can survive death of her physical body, that she promises to be comforted. Thus she is setting a very low bar for evidence. Miller needs to only convince Weirob that survival after the death of her body makes conceptual sense. He need not show that such survival is likely or even consistent with current scientific knowledge. But his proposition must be meaningful, and he must acknowledge the reality of her current situation. This means he must acknowledge that she will die in her present form and that her body will rot away. That there can be no contradiction in Miller's conception or assertion. That this is real survival he is talking about, not merely merger with being, meaning that her body chemistry will go on to feed plants and so forth. She's talking about real personal survival of a kind that she can look forward to experiencing. Finally, Sam Miller must know what he means when he is asserting that she will live after death. In other words, the proposition must be meaningful. This then is Miller's challenge for the next 3 days, and he will be using various theories of personal identity to try to meet it. It is therefore a great dialogue to use in order to help teach theories of personal identity, because this discussion will take us through several theories presented by Sam Miller and the objections to them presented by Weirob. Most of the interesting action takes place during nights 1 and 2, and so those are the ones that we will be covering. Now, at first, Miller doesn't think that there is any real work for him to do then. He sees the task as very easy. He simply says, I guess I missed the problem then. Of course it's possible. You just continue to exist after your body dies. What's to be defended or explained? You want details? Okay, 2 people meet 1,000 years from now in a place that may or may not be part of this physical universe. I am one and you are the other, so you must have survived. Surely you can imagine that. What else is there to say? This doesn't convince Weirob, however. She says, in a few days I will quit breathing. I will be put into a coffin. I will be buried. And in a few months or a few years I will be reduced to so much humus. That, I take it, is obvious, is a given. How then can you say that I am one of these persons 1,000 years from now? She then goes on to give her first argument by analogy. She points to a hospital Kleenex box sitting next to her by the bed and says, suppose I took this box of Kleenex and lit fire to it. It is reduced to ashes, and I smash the ashes and flush them down the John. Then I say to you, go home, and on the shelf will be that very box of Kleenex. It has survived. Wouldn't that be absurd? What sense could you make of it? In other words, this is what he is asking her to imagine of herself. Her body will be utterly destroyed, yet he is telling her to imagine that she will continue to exist in the future. Miller's first attempt at addressing this argument is unconvincing. He says there could be an identical box of Kleenex at your home, one just like it in every respect. Weirob at this point accuses Miller of playing with words. Remember their deal. Miller is to show her that it makes sense for her to survive. If there was somebody who was merely identical to her in every respect, but which was not really her, she could not look forward to the experiences of this person. Imagine, for example, if somebody said that they were going to kill you, but not to worry, because after you were dead they were going to build an exact replica of you which would live on in your place. Even if you believed that this person threatening you could do so, surely this would not comfort you. You might be happy to know that there is somebody just like you who will live on, but you could not look forward to the life that this person will lead. Or you could flip it. Imagine that the same person said that they would not kill you. Instead, they would build an identical replica of you and kill that person. You might feel bad for the person who is going to be killed, but you would not expect your own life to end upon that person's death. So this is important to emphasize. What Weirob is looking for is the possibility of real survival. She makes it clear that by this she means survival of a person whose experiences she can anticipate having in the future. This would be a good time to pause and introduce a couple of important philosophical concepts regarding personal identity. You should remember these. What Weirob is referring to here is the difference between qualitative identity and numerical identity. A is qualitatively identical to B if and only if A and B have all of the same qualities. For example, 2 copies of the same book are qualitatively identical. They have all of the same words, same cover, same number of pages, and so forth. If you swapped one copy with another secretly, one could not tell the difference. But you could prove that they are not the same by destroying one. If you spilled coffee on one, the other would still survive because they are not the same book. They have most of their qualities in common, but they are different actual objects. Numeric identity, however, is a much stricter form of identity. A is numerically identical to B if and only if everything that is true of A is also true of B. In other words, numeric identity is true identity. A and B are the same object, not merely identical objects. This means being in the same place at the same time. It means that if you spilled coffee on A, you also spilled coffee on B. Sometimes you can discover 2 things that you thought were different were really numerically identical to one another. In other words, that they are the same thing, but you did not realize this before. People used to think, for example, that the morning star and the evening star were 2 different stars, but it turns out that they were both the planet Venus. Likewise, one might discover that Batman and Bruce Wayne are really the same person. They are numerically identical. To bring this back around to the example of the Kleenex box, what Miller originally suggests is that the qualitatively identical Kleenex box could exist after she burned the first one. What Weirob points out is that this is not what we are interested in when it comes to personal identity. A person can survive death if and only if the person after death is numerically identical, not merely if that person happens to be a copy of the first. Remember this point because it will become important when discussing the second night as well. At this point, Miller backpedals. He says, "I'm sorry, I see that I was simply confused. Here's what I should have said. If you were merely a live human body, as the Kleenex box is merely cardboard and glue in a certain arrangement, then the death of your body would be the end of you. But surely you are more than that, fundamentally more than that. What is fundamentally you is not your body, but your soul, or self, or mind." So Miller is admitting here that if she were merely a physical object, there would be no possibility of life after death. But he believes that there is a soul or mind which can exist independently of the body. This is her essential self, and this should be familiar to all of you from our discussion of dualism. When Weirob asks if he means these words soul, self, and mind to be the same thing, he says that there might be distinctions between these concepts, but they are close enough to one another to be used synonymously in this case. He is speaking about her consciousness. Note as well that he is expressing the sole criterion of personal identity. A person is the same person if and only if she or he has the same soul. In fact, Miller directly refers to Descartes, saying, "Did Descartes not draw a clear distinction between the body and the mind, between that which is overweight and that which is conscious? Your mind or soul is immaterial, lodged in your body while you are on earth. The two are intimately related, but not identical. Now clearly what concerns us is the survival of your mind or soul. It is this which must be identical to the person before me now, and to the one I expect to see in 1,000 years in heaven." Weirob presses with the following. She says, "So I am not really this body, but a soul or mind or spirit, and this soul cannot be seen or felt or touched or smelt. That is implied, I take it, by the fact that it is material." And Miller replies, "That's right, your soul sees and smells, but cannot be seen or smelt." Weirob reminds him that they had lunch a week ago at a restaurant called Dorsey's, and asks if Miller admits that she is the same person he ate there with. Miller says that of course she is. Weirob follows up with, "When you say I'm the same person, if I understand you, that is not a remark about this body you see and could touch and I fear smell. Rather it is a remark about a soul which you cannot see or touch or smell." Miller says that Weirob understands his point perfectly. But Weirob says, "I can repeat it, but I'm not sure that I understand it." Before moving on, can you understand the potential problem for Miller here? It is important to pause and think about philosophical concepts instead of just attempting to memorize them. The exercise of attempting to anticipate where an argument is going is essential for critical reasoning. So here's the situation. Miller says that Weirob is not really a body, but she is a soul or mind. The soul or mind cannot be in any way sensed. It cannot be touched, tasted, heard, or smelt. And yet he says that he knows that he had lunch with Gretchen last week. You may wish to pause the video and think about this for a while. Do you see a problem? Here's how Weirob puts the problem. She says, "But all you can see is my body. You can see perhaps that the same body is before you now that was before you last week at Dorsey's, but you have just said that Gretchen Weirob is not a body but a soul. And judging that the same person is before you now as was before you then, you must be making a judgment about souls, which you said cannot be seen, touched, or smelt, or tasted. And so I repeat, how do you know?" Oops, now that is a problem. If the self is a soul and he cannot sense the soul, then he needs some reason to believe that it was really Gretchen who he had lunch with. Miller is quick to come up with one. He says that he knows it is Gretchen's soul because it was her body. He reasons from the principle, same body, same soul. Gretchen asks him if the converse of that principle also holds. That would be different body, different soul. So if he saw, for example, Barbara Walters' body, he would know that it was not Gretchen Weirob. He says, "Of course I would. How would you have come by Barbara Walters' body?" I want to ask you to pause again and see if you can anticipate Weirob's next objection. He just stated that same body means same soul and different body means different soul. Remember what he's trying to prove to Weirob and pause the video to think about it. Can you anticipate an objection? Weirob objects, but then merely extend this principle to heaven and you will see that your conception of survival is without sense. Surely this very body, which will be buried and, as I must so often repeat, rot away, will not be in your hereafter. Different body, different person. Do you see the problem? Miller claims that the real Gretchen cannot be seen, tasted, heard, smelled, or in any way sensed. Yet he claims to be able to recognize her as the same person that he had lunch with at Dorsey's. To do so, he needs a principle, same body, same person. Different body, different person. But he acknowledges that Gretchen's body will be destroyed. It will rot away. His own principle seems to contradict the idea that she could survive death. In order to try to fix this, he must backtrack a bit again. Miller says, I do not extend a principle found reliable on Earth to such a different situation as represented by the hereafter. That a correlation between bodies and souls has been found on Earth does not make it inconceivable or impossible that they should separate. Principles found to work in one circumstance may not be assumed to work in vastly altered circumstances. So he's claiming that even though bodies and souls are correlated on Earth, this isn't a matter of necessity, and they could exist separately in the hereafter. This leads to the question of how it is that he ever came to the principle, same body, same soul. Weirob asks if this principle is something that he knows a priori, that is to say before the senses, or if it is a well-confirmed regularity. Miller says that it is a well-confirmed regularity. Miller is pretty much forced to say that it is not known a priori, because that would mean that it is a conceptual truth and would apply in the hereafter or anywhere else. He says, then you're right. If it was part of the meaning of same body, that wherever we have the same body we have the same soul, it would have to obtain universally, in heaven as well as on earth. But I just claim it is a generalization we know by observation on earth and need not automatically extend to heaven. So Miller is claiming that he came upon the principle same body, same soul through observation. Really pause here again and see if you can think of a potential problem with this. How might this claim be a difficulty for Miller? Remember that you can pause the video. Remember that Miller has already agreed that he cannot in any way sense an immaterial soul. But he is also claiming that he somehow learned the principle same body, same soul as a well-confirmed regularity through observation. So Weirob asks him how it is he could ever correlate a soul with a body in order to establish that the same body is regularly connected with the same soul. Do you see the problem? She says, but where do you get this principle? It simply amounts to a correlation between being confronted with the same body and being confronted with the same soul. To establish such a correlation in the first place, surely one must have some other means of judging sameness of soul. You do not have such a means. Your principle is without foundation. Either you really do not know the person before you now is Gretchen Weirob, the very same person you lunch with at Dorsey's, or you do know, and it has nothing to do with the sameness of an immaterial soul. Miller says that he has difficulty following that argument, so Weirob offers him a piece of chocolate as a peace offering, from a candy box. Imagine something like the boxes of seized candy that you have likely seen around Christmas time. Miller carefully selects a chocolate, and Weirob asks why he picked the chocolate that he did. Miller says because it had a certain swirl on top, which shows that it is a caramel. In other words, he is saying that the swirl is correlated with a caramel filling. So Weirob asks how he knew that the swirl indicated caramel. Miller replies that he knows from eating a great many of them over the years. Can you see where this is going? Weirob is making an argument from analogy here. Miller essentially created a principle, same swirl, same caramel filling. He established this principle by eating, that is to say tasting, a great many such chocolates in the past. She asked him if he could ever have reached this principle if he was only shown the outside of the chocolates and never allowed to taste or see the filling. Of course he could not. How could he establish a correlation between a swirl and the filling if he was never allowed to see or taste the filling? Do you see a problem for his principle of same body, same soul? Weirob is using the chocolate as an analogy here. Weirob's soul is like the filling, and her body is like the chocolate swirl. He says that he's able to establish such a correlation in the case of chocolates by tasting the candies. But he has admitted that he cannot sense a soul in any way, shape, or form. He would not be able to establish the principle same swirl, same filling if he could never see the filling. Since he had never seen or in any way sensed a soul, he can never establish the principle same body, same soul. Weirob says, since you can never, so to speak, bite into my soul, can never see it or touch it, you have no way of testing your hypothesis that sameness of body means sameness of self. When Miller says that he is a bit lost, she clarifies. If, as you claim, identity of persons consists in identity of immaterial, unobservable souls, the judgments of personal identity of the sort we make every day, whenever we greet a friend or avoid a pest, are really judgments about such souls. Sam Miller agrees that this is right. Gretchen then says, But if all such judgments were really about souls, they would all be groundless and without foundation. Sam Miller says, that seems fair. Gretchen then says, but our judgments about persons are not simply groundless and silly, so we must not be judging immaterial souls after all. The argument then is that when he is judging sameness of persons, he cannot be judging sameness of soul. He must be judging based on something else. Miller once again takes a step back. He says, but I suspect that the problem lies in my defense of my position and not with the position itself. Look here, there is a way to test the hypothesis of a correlation after all. When I entered the room, I expected you to react just as you did, argumentatively and skeptically. Had the person with this body reacted completely differently, perhaps I would have been forced to conclude that it was not you. For example, had she complained about not being able to appear on the 6 o'clock news and missing Harry Resner and so forth, I might eventually have been persuaded that it was Barbara Walters and not you. Similarity of psychological characteristics, a person's attitudes, beliefs, memories, prejudices, and the like, are observable. These are correlated with identity of body on the one side, and of course with sameness of soul on the other. So the correlation between body and soul can be established after all by this intermediate link. So he is now saying that he can establish that she has the same soul because she has the same psychological characteristics. So the theory is now, same psychological characteristics, same soul. Can you spot the problem with this? Weirob even grants, though she does not believe, that psychological states, such as character, memory, and so forth, are immaterial states of soul. But this does not solve the problem. Pause and think about why this might be the case. Weirob says, let me explain my point with an analogy. If we were to walk out of this room, down past the mill and towards Wilbur, what would we see? Miller replies, we would come to the Blue River, among other things. Then Weirob says, and how would you recognize the Blue River? I mean, of course, if you left from here, you would scarcely expect to hit the Plate or Niobrara, but suppose you were actually lost and came across the Blue River in your wandering, just at that point where an old dam partially blocks the flow. Couldn't you recognize it? Miller says, yes, I'm sure as soon as I saw that part of the river, I would again know where I was. Then Weirob asks, and how would you recognize it? Miller says, well, the turgid brownness of the water, the sluggish flow, the filth washed up on the banks, and such. Weirob says, in a word, the states of the water which make up the river at the time you see it. So the Blue River here seems to be ironically named. The water is muddy, the flow is sluggish, and so forth. But the point is that he can recognize the river by the quality and flow of the water, e.g., by its states. Again, I would like to encourage you to pause the video and see if you can consider why this analogy might present a problem for Miller. The issue here is that the water in the river is constantly changing. Miller recognizes that it has the same quality, but it isn't the same water. The water he saw in the river years ago has long since reached the ocean, and any water he sees now would not be the same water that passes through that portion of the river 10 minutes from now. In other words, identity with the river cannot be identity of the water. The water having the same characteristics at 2 times does not mean that it is the same water. Why is this a problem? Because it indicates that the sameness of characteristics does not mean identity. A person might appear to have the same characteristics at 2 different times, but have 2 different souls. If this can be true of rivers, how can Miller know that it is not true of souls as well? Here are some possibilities. A person might have one soul until the age of 5, and then get a brand new soul that has the same psychological characteristics. A person might get a new soul every year, each time inheriting or otherwise being molded to the previous characteristics. A person might get a new soul every minute. Or a person might, like the river, be the focal point for a constant stream of different souls. Miller cannot therefore judge same psychological states equals same souls any more than he could judge the same water quality equals the same water. Note the depth of the challenge here. You might think that Miller could say, well, it could be that you have many souls, but it could also be that you have only one. My challenge was merely to show that it is possible for you to survive. But the issue here is that he doesn't even really know what it is that he is asserting when he says same psychological characteristics, same soul, because he cannot tell the difference between a universe in which people had only one soul and one in which they had 2 at different times, one in which they had a constant stream of souls, or one in which the psychological characteristics were caused by something other than a soul. If we were to meet her again in the afterlife, by his own reasoning, he still has no reason to believe that it would be her if he admits that her body has long since been destroyed. They then exchange the following dialogue. Miller: Are you saying I don't really know who you are? Weirob: not at all. You are the one who says that personal identity consists in sameness of this immaterial, unobservable, invisible, untouchable soul. I merely point out that if it did consist in that, you would have no idea who I am. Sameness of body would not necessarily mean sameness of person. Sameness of psychological characteristics would not necessarily mean sameness of person. I'm saying that if you do know who I am, then you are wrong that personal identity consists in sameness of immaterial soul. Miller makes one final attempt to fix his theory during the first night. He says they simply forgot a tenet of his theory. He says, I know that my soul and my body are intimately and consistently found together. From this one case I can generalize, at least as it concerns life in this world, that sameness of body is a reliable sign of sameness of soul. This leaves me free to regard it as intelligible, in the case of death, that the link between the particular soul and particular body it has been joined to is broken. Willard points out that this is quite a leap, given that he only has a sample of one, but even if she sets that aside, she asks, how is it that you know in your own case that there's a single soul which has been so consistently connected with your body? Miller responds, now really you cannot be serious, Gretchen. How can I doubt that I am the same person I was? Is there anything more clear and distinct, less susceptible to doubt? How do you expect me to prove anything to you when you are capable of denying my own continued existence from second to second? Without knowledge of our own identity, everything we think and do would be senseless. To which Weirob replies, but I grant you that a single person has been associated with your body since you were born. The question is whether one immaterial soul has been so associated, or, more precisely, whether you are in a position to know it. You believe that a judgment that one and the same person has had your body all these many years is a judgment that one and the same immaterial soul has been lodged in it. I say that such judgments concerning the soul are totally mysterious, and that if our knowledge of sameness of persons consisted in knowledge of sameness of immaterial soul, it too would be totally mysterious. To point out as you do that it is not mysterious, but perhaps the most secure knowledge we have, the foundation of all reason and action, is simply to make the point that it cannot consist of knowledge of identity of an immaterial soul. Since the soul cannot be sensed, it isn't just that he cannot sense Gretchen's soul and correlate it with the body. He cannot correlate his own soul, if he has one, with the body either. How can he himself know that he has always had the same soul, assuming he has one at all? Again, he might get a new soul minute by minute, each one psychologically consistent with the last. They then have the following exchange. Miller: do you doubt the existence of your own soul? Weirob: I haven't based my argument on there being no immaterial souls of the sort you describe, but merely on their total irrelevance to questions of personal identity, and so to questions of personal survival. I do indeed harbor grave doubts whether there are any immaterial souls of the sort to which you appeal. Can we have a notion of soul unless we have a notion of same soul? But I hope you do not think that this means I doubt my own existence. I think I lie here, overweight and conscious. I think you can see me, not just some outer wrapping, for I think that I am just a live human body. But that is not the basis of my argument. I give you these souls. I merely observe that they can, by their nature, provide no principle of personal identity. At this point, Miller admits that he did not comfort her and hopes to have a new argument tomorrow night. And that is where the second night will pick up. So remember where this conversation left off for next module. And that about wraps up this presentation. That was a great deal to cover, so take the time to digest it and think about it. We'll be moving on to the second night in the next module.